Morning, guys. Well, I thought I'd better get cracking on with my Jack the Ripper series. In the last one, if you remember, I did the first three of the canonical victims, and in this second bit I'm going to do the last two. So our first three were Annie Chapman, Polly Nichols and Elizabeth Stride, and the second two are Catherine Eddowes and Mary Kelly. So what we're going to do is have a look at our maps. Now, this is the map that I made, but I found a couple of better ones since then, like this one and this one. So I'll use this one for now and go back to this really sort of more detailed one when we talk about some of the movements of the ladies. So here's our first three, 1, 2, 3, and our next two, 1 and 2 here. So Catherine Eddowes. Now this to me is where it starts to get interesting. She's got a very, very interesting story. Really dodgy backstory coming from her ex-partner. Well, ex once she was dead. Her common law partner, I think you'd probably call it. But I'm going to really try not to get into it too much and just keep to the facts here, because we will go back to Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. So, our Catherine. Now, there's a very nasty inquest photograph of her, which you'll be coming to in a minute. There are two actually. One of them, they prop her up against the wall so she's standing up and they can take a photograph of her. It's pretty ghastly, so I'm warning you ahead of time that these autopsy photographs are extremely unpleasant. I kept away from the victims for quite a while. I was more interested in the suspects, which I think a lot of people are. It's very, very easy just to write these ladies off as prostitutes. It's as if a prostitute is a person, or was a person, without past, without future, and just a commodity. But as is being seen, all of these ladies had quite okay pasts, and whatever happened and whatever was happening, because it seems to be happening wholesale to people, that they start off okay, things go bad, and alcohol seems to be a huge factor in this. So this is our Catherine Eddowes, and she came from Wolverhampton. She was born on April the 14th, 1842, and at the time of her death she is 5 foot tall, has hazel eyes and dark auburn hair. She has a tattoo in blue ink on her left arm, TC, and that was Thomas Conway for one of her partners. At the time of her death, Catherine Eddowes is suffering from Bright's disease, a form of uremia. Friends spoke of Catherine as an intelligent, scholarly woman, but one who was possessed of a fierce temper. Now, it seems to be the general opinion that this was one sort of sharp lady. She was quite together. She had some education. I'm going to leave all that out for now and go back. That's what she was wearing and carrying at the time of her death. And we'll go to her history first. So her father was a tin plate worker who worked at Wolverhampton. And a contemporary newspaper says, her father and his brother William left their jobs as tin plate workers in Wolverhampton during the tin men's strike about 1848. They and their families walked to London. You see, when I did my A-level English as a mature student, we did a book by Sheridan called The Rivals, and I did an essay and I handed it in, and my tutor said to me, it's a really, really good essay, but one thing you've got to remember, you have got to stop putting your modern day conceptions of what life was like back then. It was very, very different, and we have to remember it was very different. I mean, I think we've all been brainwashed by BBC drama and Downton Abbey and things like that, that we had this sort of quasi civilised sort of like thing going on. But I don't think it was much like that at all. The education system was just being put into place. It was a place, the East End especially, was just a place full of the poor. And the deeper you got into the East End, the worse it got. And I'm going to look at a couple of places and show you just what it was like living in these so-called slums, which were, I strongly suspect, flooded out, destroyed houses that they moved into before anybody could sort them out. Anyway, let's keep going. So she went to school, St John's Charity School, Pottersfield, until her mother dies in 1855, and then they all had to go into the workhouse. But she gets cared of by her aunt in Wolverhampton. She goes back, and then she leaves home with Thomas Conway in 1863, so she's in her 20s. So at 21, she's still in with her aunt, gets involved with Thomas Conway, who'd been in the army and had a pension. So he got himself a pension. They went to Birmingham and other towns, and they made a living selling cheap books of lives written by the pensioner. Again, according to this article, they also specialised in the production of gallows ballads. Now, this is what I'm on about. They were still hanging people publicly, and it was a spectacle, so people would go, have their lunch, sing songs, and Catherine and her bloke were writing these gallows ballads. So she wrote one for her cousin, Christopher Robinson, who was hanged at Stratford in January 1866. In the course of their travels, they returned to Wolverhampton, where she had a baby, and then they go back to London, but she runs away from the pensioner. She goes into lodging house, had another son. So altogether they had 3 children. So she was a woman in a relationship, travelled about a bit, a little bit itinerant, a little bit of a sort of a life on the road, but then it doesn't work out, and they split up in 1881, and Katie takes Annie and Conway the boy. Now what happens to them, I don't know. They're not sort of talked of again. Her daughter is a bit later on, but the boy, I don't know. So in 1881, so this is 7 years before she's killed, she moves to Cooney's lodging house, 55 Flower and Dean Street, where she meets John Kelly. Kelly jobbed around the markets, but had been more or less regularly employed by a fruit salesman named Lander. Somewhere in this period, Catherine's daughter Anne marries Louis Phillips and begins to move around Bermondsey and Southwark to avoid her mother's scrounging. Take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, a lot of this is, we don't know. She might have said that, but we don't know why she was moving around. So Frederick Wilkinson is the deputy, and he says Catherine was not often in drink and was a very jolly woman, often singing. She was generally back home in the lodging house for the night between 9 and 10. He says she wasn't in the habit of walking the streets, and he had never heard of or seen her being intimate with anyone other than John Kelly. Kelly himself claimed no knowledge of her ever walking the streets. He says that she sometimes drank to excess but wasn't in the habit. So, according to this lady was had no alcohol problem, was of sound mind, and never did anything much naughty at all. But her story tells something a bit different. So what happens is, in the East End of London and other poor areas, they would go hop picking at the end of the summer, picking hops for beer in Kent and the home counties around there. So this pair claim that they went hop picking. So they went to Hunton near Maidstone in Kent, and they didn't get along very well. Apparently it was a bad summer, so they didn't stay long, came back. And they came back in company with another man and woman who had also worked in the fields, but they parted when they got to Cheltenham, and the woman gave them a pawn ticket for a flannel shirt and said, "You can have this." Right? They had no money. They didn't have any money. So they got to town, and we did get there, came straight to the house, but luck was against us. We were done for cash. So they walked back from Kent, went back to their lodging house in Flower and Dean Street, where they'd been living for 7 years, but didn't have any money to pay for the night. Yeah, this is the story. I'm trying not to get too involved here, remembering that Catherine didn't have a say in this because she was dead when all these statements came out. So they came back to London on Friday, and John managed to get a bit of money, managed to earn 6pence. Kate took 2pence and told Kelly to take the 4pence and get a bed at Cooney's at the lodging house. She said she would get a bed at the casual ward in Shoe Lane. Yeah? Now, this is Flower and Dean Street here. Yeah, that's where their lodging house was. So they get 6pence, they go back to the lodging house, and he doesn't say to her, he does later claim that he did say it to her, he doesn't say to her, "Here, love, I'm going to go and find somewhere else to stay. You have the 4pence and have the bed." No, he takes the bed and she walks all the way up to Mile End, up here. I think it actually goes off the map where she was. For her bed. Yeah? Now, I always thought that was a bit weird. Now, this next bit here, I'm not going to dwell on it, because I'm going to bring this up later. So she goes up to Shoe Lane. Superintendent of the casual ward said that Kate was very well known there, but this was the first time she'd been back for a long time. She explained that she'd been hopping in the country, but "I have come back to earn the reward offered for the apprehension of the Whitechapel murderer. I think I know him." The superintendent warned her to be careful, but didn't murder her. He didn't murder her. "Oh, no fear of that," she replied. "There is no corroborative evidence for this story, and it should be treated with a great deal of scepticism." This guy wasn't called at the inquest, so they're using it as hearsay. But I don't know, it's got a ring of truth to me about it, the whole thing. Anyway, let's carry on. So at 8 o'clock the next morning, after she spent the night at the casual ward, she heads off back. So she comes down and goes back home. Yeah, she's been all the way up here, so she comes back to Flower and Dean Street, goes back home. At this point, they decide to sell his boots. So they go to the boot. We take the boots to a pawnbroker named Jones in Church Street, and they get 2 and 6, and she and Kelly take the money, buy some food, tea and sugar. Between 10 and 11 they were seen by Frederick Wilkinson, he's the manager of the lodging house, eating breakfast in the lodging house kitchen. Only got his word for that as well. Yeah. Now let's have a look at some lodging houses. So when they say lodging house kitchen, when they said they were seen in the lodging house kitchen, I got a mental image of a bloke and a woman sat at a table, a bit BBC, a bit Downton Abbey, a bit drama, you know, a bit what we've been looking at on the television, having a cup of tea. This is what a common lodging house kitchen looked like. Yeah. And I think this one's probably quite cleaned up for the papers or a report. All Jack the Ripper's victims lived in the relatively small neighbourhood to the east and west of Commercial Street, on which social reformers have been focusing their attention for several years, and that's important as well, you know. All around here. This is the area with this sort of central here. In fact, it says Jack the Ripper's address. This is where some psychologist actually worked out that this is probably the most likely area for Jack the Ripper to live. I think my suspect, who is John Kelly, John Kelly and a few other people were probably some sort of accomplice. But we'll see. We'll get there. Yeah, I think so. Now, I look at it because I was brought up in a small town, a port town with a lot of pubs. And I'd say it was about the same sort of size as this area here. And when you're part of a pub circuit and part of a small town circuit, you get to know everybody. You get to know everybody. And in this place where I lived, there'd be huge numbers of people coming in the summer that you didn't know, but you always knew your regular people. And let's say they were drinking in the 10 Bells, and you were over here in the Hanging Cat or something. You'd know. They'd say, oh yeah, they're over in the what's it, or you might get barred from one and drink in another, and also they'd lived here for 7 years. These were old hands. These were people streetwise. You know, you get streetwise. I've lived in London for 13 years and I'm streetwise now. You get to know people, you recognise people, you know stuff. So what happens is, he sees them in the kitchen. They spent all their money again. Then she says she's going to go and see her daughter in Bermondsey. Oh, I'm off, she says. I'm going to see Bermondsey. So she parts with Kelly in Houndsditch at 2 p.m, promising to be back no later than 4. I never knew if she went to her daughter's at all, Kelly says. I only wish she had, for we had lived together for some time and never had a quarrel. Good God. Good God, you know? So this is what she does. Flowerdean Street's here, and they come down here into Houndsditch, this bit here, yeah? Have a drink. He leaves her at 2 o'clock, and she's picked up at 7:15 that night, 7:30 that night, here. Drunk as a skunk, yeah? In Aldgate Hyde Street. So he drops her off here at 2, 7:30, drunk as a skunk. And she's taken to a police station up here, remembering this is where they live. So at some point she got completely rat-arsed drunk here. She had no money, mind. Right, at 8 p.m, City PC Louis Robinson, sorry, no females then, comes across Eddowes surrounded by a crowd outside 29 Aldgate High Street. She is extremely drunk and lying in a heap. Robinson asks anybody if they know her. Nobody replies, pulls her up and leans her against the building. She falls over and they manage to drag her up to the police station. When he asks her what her name is at the police station, she says nothing. She actually says nothing. Anyway, they put her in a cell, keep checking on her, and then about 1 o'clock they go and see if she's okay. 12:15, 1 o'clock, she's sober enough to be released. I've looked this up as well, and yeah, that's what happens. They go around, check you. If you're sober enough, they will release you because they need the cells. And she leaves the station at 1 o'clock. She says, what time is it? Oh, too late for you to get anything to drink. Oh, I shall get a damn ironing when I get home. He says, serves you right, you had no right to get drunk. And he opens the doors of the station. He says, this way, missus. Please pull it to. All right, she says, good night, old cock. And off she goes. Now, where she should have gone, by rights, is out of the police station and down any one of these side streets, and she'd be home. But she doesn't. She sets off down the street back towards Houndsditch, where she was found earlier that day, down here. And outside, I think the policeman actually sees somebody out there. Yeah, and it's 30 minutes before she's found as well. So from leaving the police station here to being found dead here, 30 minutes disappears. Yeah? Okay. Here's her body. This is what is found. Yeah? So what he did, he cut her. Cut her throat. And then he cut her from top to bottom, zigzagging along here, cutting through here, And then he pulled all her intestines out and placed them over her shoulder. He removed her kidney. I'm not sure if he took her womb. And then he slashed her face terribly. I'm guessing she was a very pretty woman at one time as well. He did inverted V's on here, messed around with her eyes, messed around with her mouth. He was pretty angry with this woman, I'd say. Yeah. Now it gets very, very interesting when they start talking to people at the inquest and what have you, but I'll go back to that at a later date. Bare bones of what happened. This is what she was wearing. And because she was an itinerant woman, she wore everything. She'd been hot picking in Kent, so you had to wear your belongings. So she had a bonnet, a jacket, a skirt, a vest, a body, another bodice, a petticoat, another skirt, a chemise. She didn't have any knickers on, but that was quite common. Quite common to be going commando back in those days. And most of the pants were like chaps as well. They were like those cowboy things with no crotch. Quite strange and quite impractical, I think. But they had very long dresses, didn't they? And to go to the toilet, they just sort of like pull their pants up and pull their skirts up and squat. And of course, if she is a prostitute, which a lot of these women were casually, if not full time, then knickers would have been in the way, wouldn't they? She had a pair of men's lace-up boots on, mohair laces, right boot repaired with red thread. She had a pair of red gauze silk as a neckerchief, a hanky, another hanky, some pockets. She had bits and pieces of stuff. She had 2 small bags of bed ticking, some pipes, some tea, some sugar, an empty matchbox, 12 pieces of white rag, some slightly blood-stained. I'm guessing that was for menstruation. No Tampax back then, girls. Piece of coarse linen white, piece of blue and white shirting, piece of red flannel, some soap, a tooth comb, a table knife, a teaspoon, cigarette case, a ball of hemp, piece of old white apron, several buttons and a thimble, mustard tin containing 2 pawn tickets, one in the name of Emily Birrell, for a man's flannel shirt. That's the one that they said that they got on their journey back from hopping. And then the other one was dated September the 28th for a pair of men's boots. Both of the addresses that she gives are false. Now, interesting. When she flogged the men's boots, when they went and flogged the men's boots together, she didn't give her own name. She gave the name of Jane Kelly of 6 Dorset Street. Yeah? The next victim is Mary Jane Kelly, and she was murdered in Dorset Street. Yeah? Also, when she was released from the prison, at some point she gives her name as Mary Ann Kelly. Which is, it's just all quite strange. Yeah, when she's released, she gives her name as Mary Ann Kelly and her address is 6 Fashion Street. So, although she lives here, on her pawn ticket for her boots, she says she's living here and her name's Jane Kelly. And then when she's released from the station, she says she lives here and that her name is Mary Ann Kelly. It's crazy. Something going on here. I always thought there was something going on with this Kelly and Mary Jane and Mary Ann, and something going on. Anyway, that apart, you see how easy it is to get waylaid. That apart, that sort of covers our Catherine. I don't know how long I've been doing this and whether I should really go on to Mary Jane, because that is the one, Mary Jane Kelly. Yeah, we'll get her over with, and then I can go back to Catherine after I've looked at some suspects. Yeah? So this was the tour de force of the Ripper, Mary Jane. This is the one that everybody tends to concentrate on. Easily the most horrific. She was 25 years old, so we had a little bit of a swing down in age here. So she was born around 1863, 5'7" and stout, blonde hair, blue eyes and a fair complexion. Maria Harvey, a friend, says that she was most superior to that of most persons in her position in life. So she was a little bit of a hoity-toity prostitute. She was a little bit more of a classy girl, you know, higher end. She'd be a higher end girl, and she had her own place as well. Said she spoke fluent Welsh. She was sober habits. When in liquor she was very noisy, otherwise she was a very quiet woman. Not a notorious character. Good, quiet, pleasant and well liked by everybody. So everybody loved Mary Kelly. Now, almost everything that is known about Mary Jane Kelly comes from Joseph Barnett, who lived with her just prior to her murder. Now, he obviously became a suspect, and he's still quite a strong suspect, I think. He got all the information from Kelly herself. Some is conflicting, and it may be suspected that some, or perhaps much of it, is embellished. They did used to sort of like embellish their stories. Alcoholics and the like, they have a habit of spinning a good tale. She was born in Limerick, Ireland, but we do not know if that refers to the county or the town, and she moved to Wales. And her dad, John, another John Kelly, worked in an ironworks, and she claims to have had 6 or 7 brothers and 1 sister. And John McCarthy, the landlord at Miller's Court, states that she received a letter from her mother in Ireland. Barnett says she never corresponded with her family. So she's always got like a little bit of a dodgy history. She claims to have had a relative on the London stage. So at the age of 16 she marries. He's killed in an explosion. Then she moves to Cardiff and works as a prostitute. She comes into London in 1884. Stays at a refuge, scrubbed floors, worked. So at some point she gets a job working, I don't know, as some sort of like high-class escort girl. Where she's it says she went to France, but she didn't like it very much. Yeah, according to Joseph Barnett, on arriving in London, Kelly went to work in a high-class brothel in the West End. She says that during this time she frequently rode in a carriage and accompanied one gentleman to Paris, which she didn't like, and she returned. Yeah? And it was after this that she sort of ended up in the East End after this bit. It would appear that on her arrival in London she made the acquaintance of a Frenchwoman residing in the neighbourhood of Knightsbridge, who, she informed her friends, led her to pursue the degraded life which had now culminated in her untimely end. She made no secret of the fact that while she was with this woman she would drive about in a carriage and made several journeys to the French capital, and in fact led a life which is described as that of a lady. By some means, however, at present not exactly clear, she drifted into the East End. Here her fortune failed her, blah 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 blah. So in 1886 she leaves McCarthy's house to live with this guy Joseph Barnett. She'd lived with somebody else called Morganstone, and she'd lived with somebody else called Fleming, and ended up with Barnett. So she'd been sort of trotting around bloke to bloke. Somebody else also called Joe. Yeah. Then in 1886 she's in Thrall Street. Map. Thrall Street is this one. You got Flower and Dean, Fashion and Thrall. Yeah. Everybody would have known Mary Kelly, I would have thought. I think everybody would have known her. She would have been like the stuck-up one. And she lives in Thrall Street. That's where she meets Barnett. Moves to Miller's Court. And I think what happens is he loses his job and they fall out because she's gone back onto the streets and he leaves her. So on October the 30th, yeah, they had an argument. Barnet goes off, and he goes off to stay at Buller's boarding house, Bishopsgate. Barnet states at the inquest that he left her because she was letting other prostitutes stay in the room. She would never have gone wrong again, he tells the newspaper, and I shouldn't have left her if it had not been for the prostitutes stopping at the Eddowes. She only let them stay there because she was good-hearted and didn't like to refuse them shelter on cold, bitter nights, he adds. We lived comfortably until Marie allowed a prostitute named Julia to sleep in the same room. I objected, and as Mrs. Harvey afterwards came and stayed there, I left and took lodgings elsewhere. So the other rumour is that she was letting people stay there because everybody was worried about Jack the Ripper. So Maria Harvey stayed with Kelly on the nights of November the 5th and the 6th, and she went. And then there's a little bit of her movements backwards and forwards. Somebody goes to pick up the rent the next morning, looks through the window, and sees a total horror show. A complete and utter total horror show. There's a few different people sighted. She's seen with 3 or 4 different people. 3 or 4 different blokes. Blokes with top hats, astrakhan coats, massive 5'6" or 7. This one here is quite a good one. We'll go back to these later. 3 a.m. They can hear her singing downstairs. Somebody hears a faint cry of, "Oh, murder." But as the cry of murder is common, she pays no attention to it. So the next morning, he knocks on the door, the landlord. No response, looks through the broken window and sees this horror show, yeah. The body was lying naked in the middle of the bed, the shoulders flat, but the axis of the body inclined to the left side of the bed. The head was turned on the left cheek. I'm not going to go through it all. Basically, he took all the skin off the stomach and thighs and took everything out of her insides and just placed it all over the room. He cut her breasts off. He completely destroyed her face. He took out her uterus. He totally took her to pieces, smashed her face up, totally took her face, took her heart out. Nobody knows where the heart went. She was just totally, completely mashed up. Now, for somebody with 6 or 7 brothers and sisters, no family member could be found to attend the funeral. Yeah? So there we have our 5 victims. Our 5 victims. And I'm going to leave it here because we've got them all in position now. Yeah, 1, Polly Nichols. 2, Annie Chapman. 3, Liz Stride. 4, Catherine Eddowes. And 5, Mary Kelly. Now, Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes, they called a double event because she was found not long before she was found. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to actually get here and do this. Before I go, let's have another little look at these common lodging houses, because I want to just tell you how many there were. Right. Most of them were owned by middle-class entrepreneurs and investors, the majority of whom lived well outside the area and entrusted the day-to-day running of the businesses to wardens or keepers. Many of these had criminal backgrounds and operated on the periphery of the law. They would turn a blind eye, probably in return for a share of the proceeds, to illegal activity and blatantly flouted the regulations stating that men and women, unless married, must be kept separate. So that is our Frederick Wilkinson from Cooney's in Flower and Dean Street, where Catherine Eddowes and John Kelly were living at the time of her murder. He was one of these living on the edge of the law types. So in the time of all this happening, there are no less than 146 registered lodging houses with a number of beds exceeding 6,000. Of these, 1,150 are on Flower and Dean Street alone, and nearly 700 in Dorset Street. Some of the houses contain as few as 4 beds, whilst others have as many as 350. At a few of these, men only are received, and at others, women only. But in the majority, there are what are known as double DOS beds. There's a house called White's House in Flower and Dean Street, where a man and woman could sleep together. There is little room to doubt the truth of the assertion that when these double beds are let, no questions are asked and the door is opened for the most frightful immorality. That would be SEX. Yeah. So there we go. Thanks for watching, guys, and please comment.